If it's a quiet night out at the beach and your ex-old lady suddenly out of nowhere shows up with a story about her current billionaire land developer boyfriend and his wife and her boyfriend and a plot to kidnap the billionaire and throw him in a loony bin,
I need your help, Doc.
maybe you should just look the other way.
Hi everybody, it's B007 here for a 10-minute spoiler-free movie review, and I'm so excited to talk to you about Inherent Vice, which is the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie based for the first time on a Thomas Pynchon novel, never been filmed before because they're so complex and crazy and deal with everything and nothing, and how can you possibly put them on screen? The resulting film is, I think, one of the weirdest, craziest, most bizarre films probably of the year. The woman who was sitting next to me in the cinema as we walked out today just turned to me and said, "Did you like it?" Now, bear in mind, I've never met this woman before in my life. This is very un-English to just speak to a stranger. And I was like, oh my god, I loved it. It's Pynchon, it's Anderson, it's crazy. It's like The Big Lebowski and LA Confidential had a bastard hippie love child and then coughed out this movie. And she was like, I hated it. I wanted to leave after 30 minutes. And the weird thing is as much as I love this movie, I can totally understand that reaction. So in the course of this review, I'm going to tell you that I loved it. I do recognize it has flaws, but in all honesty, everything that Paul Thomas Anderson makes just has this look and feel and attention to detail and just this all-enveloping, it's just so amazing. And yeah, so I'm a bit of a fangirl, as you might have guessed. It's not as austere and brilliant and masterful as There Will Be Blood, and indeed The Master. It really does feel more like he's channeling the Coen brothers through his own sensibility, but you have to give it a go. So what is the film about? It is a film that is kind of like a film noir with all the kind of pluses and minuses that genre entails. In other words, it has a certain mood of craziness and corruption and seediness, and there's all these people, some are very wealthy, some are very poor. There are damsels in distress and drug use and sordid sexuality and all sorts of bits of corruption and plot device, and you never quite know whether it's all going to resolve. You enter this maze of corruption and you may never get out. At times when you're in a film noir, you don't know if the author or indeed the filmmaker has a freaking clue how the film's going to end, and sometimes they just kind of run out. And I think that's a little bit the case with Inherent Vice. It starts with such momentum and drive and hilarity, and the first hour of this movie is pretty much the funniest thing I've seen all year, and then it kind of drifts a little, but I think that's kind of intentional. And then it goes very dark and subversive, and there's a sex scene near the end that's just very weird, and oh my goodness, I mean, that could have PhDs written on it. And then it kind of finishes up kind of back in a warm, happy, fuzzy place. So, yeah, I realize through all this I still haven't told you what it's about. So let's try again. Joaquin Phoenix plays a private investigator called Doc, living in early 70s LA, beach community outside LA. And his ex-girlfriend, Shasta, turns up and she looks really stressed. She's now living with a super rich real estate mogul, and his wife and her lover are planning to have him put into a loony bin and to take him for all his money, and they've asked Shasta to come in on this deal, and she kind of feels bad about it. So she turns to her ex-boyfriend Doc, and she knows that he's kind of seeing on the side this DA called Penny, played by Reese Witherspoon, excellent little cameo role, and she needs help. And then all of a sudden she disappears and the real estate mogul disappears, and then also kind of randomly this other guy disappears who it turns out was a heroin addict, and the PI is called by his wife, and then it turns out he might be doing undercover work for the police or the FBI, or maybe some right-wing weird Reagan-Nixon funded group, and maybe he's involved with the Nazis who are the bodyguards of the real estate moguls. And Michael Kenneth Williams, who played Omar Little in The Wire, turns up and he's just out of prison and he's after this guy for money, I think, because of some deal they did with the Nazis that didn't go well. Yeah, so it all gets a little bit complicated and tricky. I think, oh yes, the other thing to mention is that all of this is swirling around a big drug cartel called the Golden Fang, who have a boat also called the Golden Fang, and it's something to do with orthodontists, I think. There's so much going on in this movie. Like, you can accuse some movies of having too little plot. My God, this has kind of like so much plot and no plot. It's like it's always going. There's always some crazy, weird, connected thing happening, and yet no one really knows where it's headed to. And meanwhile, there's all these kind of random people. Like, Doc apparently has this sidekick that we always see driving around with him, except he can't drive, and you never kind of figure out like who he is and what he does. You never really know why Doc has his his private investigator's office in a doctor's surgery. I mean, was he a doc at some point? Clearly not. And yeah, so it is just deeply, deeply weird. Like I said, the first hour of this movie just plays like The Big Lebowski to me. It was so Dude Abides. I mean, you had the whole kind of echo of having a billionaire, a little girl in trouble, the whole Jackie Treehorn sort of porn 70s house. You can definitely see that in the house that belongs to the real estate mogul and his wife, who is just hilariously played by Kristen Scott Thomas's sister. So yeah, that all kind of goes down. And I should mention actually that in the first hour of that movie, the two complete scene stealers are Josh Brolin as a LAPD detective, nicknamed Bigfoot, and maybe it's just me being juvenile, but just a scene of him driving, shot in landscape, so to say, shot in profile, sort of sucking on a black ice cream lolly, or is it a chocolate covered banana? That just made me laugh a lot. The scene where he's telling Doc that he's a Renaissance cop, according to the LA Times, is just hilarious. Similarly, there's a small cameo as well in that scene of Benicio del Toro as Doc's lawyer. Well, actually, he's a marine lawyer, so not necessarily so helpful in bailing him out of trouble. But that also then, of course, reminds you of Fear of Loathing in Las Vegas, where Benicio del Toro plays the Samoan lawyer to Johnny Depp's Hunter S. Thompson. And again, there's something very Hunter S. Thompson and Gonzo about this whole film. The other person who totally steals scenes in this movie is an actress called Hong Chow, who plays a prostitute called Jade, who is so funny. I mean, she just absolutely takes this movie by the balls. I mean, I have to say, the juvenile humor, it's not just on me. It runs through the movie. I mean, you've got you've got just the fact that they've cast all these kind of brothers and sisters, less famous siblings of people in this film, like all the way through to the small roles. You've got these Dickensian, like, genuine comedy names, like Dr. Lilyhammer and Dr. Buddy Tubeside. Two hookers called Jade and Bambi. My particular favorite is like an old Hollywood movie star who's now sort of the owner of the Golden Fang, called Burke Stodger. I mean, these are just funny names. So there's evidently people, Dr. Igor, how could I forget Dr. Igor? So there's obviously people having a whole bunch of fun with this film. But like I said, in between all that, as we move into the last half of it, and certainly the relationship between Doc and his ex-girlfriend Shasta, and like I said, that kind of very weird but sort of very kind of, I need to see it again, sex scene that they have. Yeah, there's deep stuff going on there. And what do I think this movie is about? Well, I don't know even how I can spoil this movie, because who the hell knows what's going on. What I think the movie is about is just trying to capture a moment and a feeling. And it really chimes with that Hunter S. Thompson project of capturing that moment, that Altamont moment when the hippie dream of the 60s turns sour, when actually what you're left with is addiction and abuse and sexual exploitation and political corruption, and just the assumption that everything is bad and controlled and evil. And it's so amazing just seeing this wonderful production design that situates you right in that moment where everything has turned to grime. But at the same time, a movie that's just hilarious. I mean, my goodness, if you say to me the phrase "mu panikeku" now, I'm going to start laughing. So, yeah, what can I say? Inherent Vice. It has its longers. It is weird. It is weird. But if give it 20 minutes. If you don't laugh at the first scene with Josh Brolin when he's interrogating Doc with a lawyer there, if that doesn't turn you on, just leave, because it's going to go downhill from there. But if you loved things like Lebowski, if you love Paul Thomas Anderson, if you love things that are noir, and if you're willing just to go with it, my goodness, you're going to have a good time. So I love Inherent Vice. What can I say? If you've seen the film and agree or disagree with my take, please feel free to leave a comment at the blog, b007.com.